Hey, welcome back everyone. Our next speaker is here, Daniel.
Hi.
Hey. So Daniel, I do know you a bit, but of course I did read your bio, and in your bio says that you're a serial conference organizer and meetup runner. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure.
A bit.
So what I do is I organize lots of things. I think that the biggest one is DevOps Days. I'm part of a larger team, and we have one every month. With the recent situation, that's scaled down a bit.
Okay.
But we recently did the DevOps Days online, a full day event, and I visit almost every meetup I can go to. So,
exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's me.
You're not the one on the top. Here, let me.
Cool. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's also what I actually like, because the boundary is so low. Actually, attending other meetups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I do attend also other things than my regular serverless bubble. So I also really appreciate that. So one of your main hobbies is, I know, barbecuing.
Yeah.
So have you been putting some extra effort in that now during this time?
Well, I have the situation that where I live, I can't have open fire.
Oh.
So that's a bit of an issue. But I do give workshops on barbecuing.
Oh wow. Didn't know that.
On locations, and there we have large barbecues.
Nice.
So yes, I have been barbecuing. Not as much as I hoped, but...
Okay. So now I'm wondering, why didn't we ask Daniel to also do some barbecuing here? I mean, there's a lot of space outside.
Yeah. Well, that was possible.
Man. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
for the next conference,
we must like pick a new date very soon, so we can challenge Daniel on this skill as well.
Okay. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So your session will be about AKS, and then especially Gatekeeper and policies. Things were all new to me. So please enlighten to me.
I think you will learn something today. Yeah, but that's great. Yeah.
I need that. Yeah. Any last things you want to say before Daniel goes on the stage? Suus?
I'm totally looking forward to this call. I've known Daniel for a while now and enjoy a lot of his activities here and there. Not the barbecuing one though. That's
Missed opportunity. Okay.
Yeah, missed opportunity.
Missed
Now I'm
opportunity.
really wondering about that. But let's just enjoy your session right now. So if you can walk over to the stage, then we can start the session soon. So give it up for Daniel. Now there's nobody here. That's weird from the online thing, right? Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Let's talk about AKS and containers, a bit different than barbecuing. All right. So to start everything off, this is what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to set some definitions. I want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. Then we're going to talk about Open Policy Agent, admission control in the API server. Then we're going to set up Gatekeeper. We're going to look into Azure Policy. And if we have time left, I'm going to go into conf test. All right, so first a little bit about me. I started in IT in 2008, so that means that I'm now 22 years in. In the 22 years, lots of stuff has happened. I started out in operations and then moved out to do something with Ruby for a few years. And then I moved back to operations, and that operations actually was data centers. So even before cloud, I did stuff with servers. And then in 2013, something nice happened. This new tool was announced called Docker. And in that same year, for me personally, something bad happened. I got burned out because I was the only IT person in a larger company. I was at home for about 6 months or so, and then I found this thing called DevOps, this entire new thing, and that was for me eye-opening. So I joined the DevOps Days Amsterdam team from 2014 onward, and in that same year, Microsoft embraced open source. That was mind-blowing. And that was also the time that I started to look into the Microsoft ecosystem, because before that year I only worked with Linux and open source. After 2015, I started to hear about this thing called Kubernetes. And in 2017, I started to do my first work in that field. Just last year, I joined Fullstack, and in that year, I became certified on that platform as well. So let's get to the definitions. What is a policy? It's a set of ideas that have been agreed upon. So we as a group had made some rules that we want to apply. So let's talk about governance. For me, it's the control of activities of an organization. It's a bit broader than that, but for me, and especially in this talk, it means that we want to control the activities happening on our clusters. So why am I having this talk with you? I want to control what end users are doing on the clusters that I am responsible for. That's not to hold them down. I want to empower them to be as fast as they can within the boundaries that they have. So to give you an example, there's this development team that's going extremely fast in building microservices. But one of those services is blowing up my cluster. I have no idea from who that microservice is, who I should contact, or where I can get more information. One of the ways that we can do that is by adding the labels that tell me that information. So that will be the motivation throughout this talk. All right, so we want to make sure that we follow a policy. In order to do that, there's a tool out there that's part of the CNCF framework. It's called Open Policy Agent. And what you should know is that it's an open source and a general purpose engine. This is important because it's not only for the Kubernetes ecosystem. You can check every JSON-based file with this engine. This engine has a language called Rego. And if you know something about code and you read this, then you get confused. It's still for me hard to read this, but I will show you in a demo how this works. Because this is a DSL, and you can query over JSON, and it gives you feedback. It's not a general purpose language, so don't try to read it as such. Let me switch over to my editor. Let me see if this works. Okay, so we just set let me zoom in. We just said that it can find things and then give me the feedback. So let's look at the second rule. We will check at some level if this is true. If this all is true, then do nothing. If it's false, then we will exit. So to give you an example to make it a little more clear, I have installed the OPA plugin into VS Code. So I can now say, evaluate this package. What you will see is there's no deny and no warn based upon the input that we have here. So it started out with a YAML file. This is a Kubernetes file, and it has a bunch of labels. The thing that we want to check is if there's a match labels app under spec. So if you go back to the Rego, this is what we check. So this now is true, as you can see in this example. If we change app to contact, it's not in here. So if I now execute, you will see that there has to be a label. So this became false, and we did an exit. Keep this in mind for the rest of the talk. I will come back to this many times. Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now let's zoom in to admission control. What you see on the screen is a simplified version of the API server. More is going on, but this is what we should know to talk about Gatekeeper. When you send a payload to the API server, you get authenticated. You get to some RBAC rules, and then you get to something cool, admission control. In the beginning, it was not dynamic. It was just admission control, and it was hard-coded in the API server, how that worked, what you could, what you couldn't. And at a certain point, that was not enough anymore, so it became dynamic. The cool thing of the dynamic admission control is that you can call to an external service to get a validation. And you can see this as just another external service. A pod on your cluster that's doing something for you. It's using a webhook to make this happen. More on that in the Gatekeeper part. What you should think of is that if we make this call to the controller to validate the payload, we can then use any language that we want. We can write it in Python. We could even do Java. Instead, I expect us to use Go. And if you do something with HashiCorp Vault, you might already know the mutating controller. For this talk, we won't zoom into that part. We will just look at the validating controller. Here I also have something to show you. Where's my mouse? Okay. Response review. Okay, so if we think back to, let me open up the diagram. Oh, no. Okay, so if you look back to this controller, the call that we get is is basically a JSON call, and it's the review. So we get a payload that has everything in there about the object, but also about the user. So we could then parse this file with Python, and the only thing that we have to do is we have to send back a response. The most important here is if it's allowed, yes or no. So if you think back to what I just told you about the Rego language, what we basically should build in this case is some kind of parser that uses OPA in order to parse this data and then send back if it's allowed or not. Okay. So that's the admission controller. Now let's talk about Gatekeeper. As I just told you, we can use a webhook in order to go to an external service. So what Gatekeeper does is it brings up a service inside of the cluster that hooks into the admission controller by a webhook. Next to that, it also brings the policies into the landscape by having them as CRDs. It's easier to deploy. It's one big package that we roll out, and that gives you all the functionalities that you need. Another important thing here is we can then start to use constrained templates. I will zoom into that later, but that basically splits up the actual data from the policy. So different teams can have different values if we would like to. Let's install Gatekeeper. We're gonna do that. In Azure Cloud Shell. Let me see if I can mirror my screen for a moment. Okay, so what I already did is I already built a test cluster because that can take some while. And we are connected with the wrong cluster, so let's connect with the right one. Oh. And what I will show you is that we do not have anything on the cluster. This is just a bare AKS cluster, nothing on there. I even only have one node. So this is all you need to get started and to get the concept going of the validation. Okay, so I told you we need to install Gatekeeper. That is basically a YAML file. I hope you can see this. I can't really zoom this in, but it contains all the CRDs and the deployments and the webhook configuration. So let me apply this. Oh, it goes quite fast. So, as I just told you, there are a bunch of resources. There's a few RBAC rules, and here is the magic. There is a controller manager that works together with the validating webhook configuration. So the most important thing to know is that we don't send everything to this webhook. Right now it's configured to only get create and updates. So if you worry about leakage or that kind of things, you can configure what is being sent over that webhook to the service. Okay, so now I just have installed Gatekeeper, but there are no rules yet. So in order to define a rule, we have to define a constraint template. So I got one for the demonstration that is checking on labels. So this is also a CRD, and that gives us integration within the Kubernetes landscape. But what are we actually going to do? So there's two things. One, we do a validation that the owner label or that there is a label, and that needs to have a value that is in line with a specific regex. So I'm going to apply this file as well. So we now have a constraint template with the name K8S required labels. So in order to use this, we need to make a constraint. This actually fails the data for the template. So what I said here is that I want to check if every pod has an owner label that has a regex based upon my username at this Agile bank. So let's apply this as well. All right, so we now have a constraint template and an actual constraint in place. Let's test out if this works. So I have a pod that installs Nginx but does not have a label. So what I expect is that it won't start the container. And indeed, it tells me that all the pods should have an owner label that points to your company username. So if I then fix that by adding a label with my username, it creates a container. And it's up and running. So what you just saw is we made an installation of Gatekeeper. We made a specific template. There are many out there, but I just did one for now. And we filled that with a constraint. You can have many constraints for a template because of the scoping. So you can scope on a namespace or on a specific type or whatever that you like, but that's more advanced. So this is basically the standalone Gatekeeper setup. You can use this on any Kubernetes platform. It's not linked to Azure. it is the case that Microsoft is contributing to Gatekeeper as open source project, which is awesome. But you can take this, you can run this anywhere, you can even do this on-prem, whatever you want. Switching back. This is annoying. All right. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about Azure Policy. This is an extension to Gatekeeper. So what I just have shown you, if you have to do this over 15 clusters in your organization, you're not going to be happy. There's still, so even if you do GitOps, there might still be issues with not every cluster having the same configuration or the same policies. You still might have issues with different configurations and such. And this is where Azure Policy already is good at, right? So if you have seen the talk of Sjoukje this afternoon, she's shown you that there's this whole Azure landscape with policies, and you can use blueprints and stuff like that. So what they've done is they have extended the policy framework to include Gatekeeper. I do have to warn you though, right now it's still in preview. And if you use a preview mode on your existing production systems, you might have an issue with support. So check that before you get going. It's also a very large red warning sign in the documentation, so I can't warn you enough. Let me set up okay. So we will be using the other cluster. So I will show you that that again, it's an almost empty cluster. The only difference here is that I already have an Nginx without a label running. I have done this to show you what will happen if you enable the policy open on an already running system. For everything else, it's empty. So the only thing I've done is I've deployed a cluster and I've put one Nginx without a label on there. If we then go to policy, you will also see that I do not have any policies yet for Kubernetes. It's just the standard Azure policy right now. Okay, so let's enable add-on. So we have to enable the add-on on the cluster. So you can have separate environments where it's not enabled, and on the other it can be enabled. So you have the freedom to make that work. Depending on the internet speed here, this might take a while, but we have to wait. So what will happen is that if you will now see that there's an update in progress on my AKS, and you could also enable this with the UI by clicking on this button. But right now it's grayed out because we are updating the cluster. And I think I can show you, because here it's not enabled. So if it's not enabled yet, you can enable it by clicking on this button, and now we still have to wait. What we can do in the meantime is I can already enable. It's done. Cool. So what you will see right now is that there's this gatekeeper system thing came to life. And I have 2 pods for the policy and the policy webhook. So what we will now do is we will assign a policy. Let me search for the... So as you can see, there's a lot of built-in options that you can choose from. Filter label. Yes, okay, so this is the same label as we just used. So we can see what they are gonna enable. And the fun thing is that they actually link to GitHub content. So you can find these labels or these YAML files on GitHub. So if you want to cheat and you want to do stuff on your own, check this repo, and you can take these YAML files and implement them into your own Gatekeeper, and then use the Microsoft work for your own. But for now, we're gonna assign this. We want to scope it to everything. Where is the... Okay. And the labels that we want is owner. And if it's not there, we want to deny. You can also check this to audit if you want to see what's going to happen on your cluster. But for now, we're going to deny. And there's a few namespaces that we don't want to check. So if you, as an operations team, having a namespace that you want to exclude, you can add it here. We don't do any remediation because we only check when a pod is incoming. So what's already running on the cluster, we don't kill. Let's make it. Okay, it's not started yet. So this might take a second. Oh. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you what should happen. And that is if we if we now deploy the broken pod, it's already there, so it won't kill it, it won't change it. Let me see if it has run. No, it's not started yet. Why is it not started? Okay, so what happened in my pre-demo is that here you will see that you have one failing rule, because there's one pod now in your cluster that does not apply the labels, so it does not adhere your policy. As you have seen, this was way less work than doing the installation by hand. I didn't have to write the YAML files by hand. I simply had to say, apply this policy to my cluster, and it worked. Especially if you have multiple clusters, this is way easier than doing it by running your own gatekeeper. Okay, so that was the warning. We now have shown you how it works in Azure. Oh. So, you might ask yourself, it's cool that you block this deployment on the cluster, but what are we going to do to help the developers shift this left? Because we want to know before we deploy that the deployment will break. There's this new tool. Well, it's not totally new, but just last week it has been moved under the Open GitHub repo, and it's called conftest. What this does, it has the Rego language, and it tests in your CI/CD if you comply to the rules. Also here I have a demo. Okay. So just as you have seen in the other test, it's based upon Rego. What I've done here is this is from a repo that has all the changes in upcoming versions. And as you can see, one of the changes will be that we no longer have extensions v1 beta 1 for the ingress, but it will change to networking. So as the development teams have this ingress rule for many iterations, they have no idea that this will be changing into the future. So with this policy, we can help them and warn them that in an upcoming version, this will change. So here you will see the old syntax. And what we will do is I have this installed locally, and we can run this test by telling the framework use this YAML file and then use the policy that's included in the folder. And if we run this, you will then get a warning. So if we update to networking v1, and rerun, all the tests will pass. So this is an excellent way to help your development teams with upcoming API changes. Fun to show is that I've also put this into a GitHub workflow. And right now, you will see that it has run. The downside is it's right now just a warning, so it's not blocking, but we can change that by saying if it's a warning, you should also exit 0 or exit 1 and make sure that the build stops. Let's see, so this is based upon the deprecation repo. Oh, let me zoom in. You can find this on GitHub. It's also open source, and you can simply read some of the documentation and try for yourself if your specs are up to spec to 1.22, I think. It's the latest that they already have. Yes, so we are now at 1.18, I believe. That's the latest stable. And they go up to 1.22 with upcoming spec changes. All right. So, if you'd like to know more, scan my QR code. You will go to my website. In the upcoming weeks, I will make sure to post lots of more information about Gatekeeper, and I will especially zoom into the deprecation checks for with the conf test. So lots of more documentation in the upcoming weeks on my website. And thank you all for listening.
So thank you very much, Daniel. That was like, wow, that was just a lot of information in a very short moment.
You definitely delivered on your promise that I would learn something. So
this is
a lot of new information.
Yeah, totally.
So thanks for that.
It's new. It's a lot. It's hard to do in just half an hour. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so now you mentioned a lot of things. I, followed it, and there was so many things. I'm like, okay, but how? If you want to dive into this, where do you even start? Because it's overwhelming. If you even look at the GitHub page, it's each little chapter is.
Yeah. So if you go to the Gatekeeper GitHub page, it's a large documentation file. Yes, but every step is one step, and as I just have shown, you can start out with one node, just apply stuff, see what's happening. But if you don't want to go all the way to your setup yet, you can just say, let's play around with conftest. Let's play around with Rego. Let's see what's happening.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not all the way to the end yet, so not all the way to enforcing the policies, just start with your CI framework, right?
Yeah.
Just start there and see if the things that you push are somewhat okay. And so I do this at a large enterprise, and we see that day 2 operations is an issue. So they are going fast, and it's awesome, and they all think it's cool, and then things start to break down, and no one knows who to call, right? So
yeah, exactly. Classic.
And having a guideline helps in this. So it will not fix your issues. It will not solve your day 2 operations, but it will help you. And especially if you have DevSecOps people that are willing to think with you and work with you to define those policies, I think you can make lots of improvements real fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. Okay. And then to get back onto the Rego specific language, the domain specific language, how hard is that to learn? Yeah.
Yes. So as I told you, I did some stuff with Ruby. I did some stuff with Python. I haven't looked around to Go yet, but this is a completely different language. You really need to have the documentation open. Yeah. But as soon as you start to think that everything has to be true, then you might be able to wrap your head around it. And it's an extensive documentation page. Yeah. The downside is that there's this differentiation yet between so Rego is the language, but inside of the cluster we have this template which is Rego, but it's also not completely Rego. There's this stuff that's wrapped around it. Okay. And there is a lot of work happening right now to integrate those two better, so that I can use the same templates for my CI as well. Nice. And that's also why they now moved the project into the Gatekeeper ecosystem, because now you have the framework, you have Gatekeeper, and you have conftest. Yeah. And those three are working together to be one engine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because now you're running conftest in the cloud, but would you normally also run it in your pipeline as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So Gatekeeper is the operator that's inside of your cluster that is using the templates. So it would be cool if the templates are the same thing as we can give to the test as well.
Yes, exactly.
So and right now it looks the same, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's tricky. Okay.
Yeah.
Really cool. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and also a good tip if you want to create your own policies, then you pointed out that you should look at the Git repo, which already has some predefined ones, and then make some changes.
So right now, and I hope that will change. You cannot apply your own stuff in Azure Policy yet. Okay. It's still preview, so we might see that happening, but you can only use what they have. But you might submit to the repo, and then
it gets picked
you
up.
might be included in the Azure Policy framework, right? So
I see. I see. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that is capable, but
Okay.
you could try.
No, it's nice that at least it's extensible and it looks like the way to go.
And it's all YAML files, so enjoy.
I'm not sure if okay. I'll ask a question, maybe a bit nasty, but do you like to edit YAML files?
I have an editor that is just for that.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I have all the plugins I can get just for YAML files. Yes.
Okay, good answer.
Don't mention YAML.
Okay, thanks a lot. I've got no more questions.
And thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
So next up we have Jonathan Mills on Azure Data Factory, which is totally awesome. So be sure to hang in and check out the next session. We're going out for a little break.
大家好。
Kamusta?
Servus.
Hi.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Yassas.
Hoi.
Hoi. Ik ben
Thanks. Ja, maar ik vond... 大家好。
Kamusta?
Servus.
Hi.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Yassas.
Hoi.
Hoi. Ik ben
I'm Ryan Stropik
Nederlands.
from Austria.
日本からこんにちは。私は不破孝之です。
Ciao, sono Stefano Tempesta, dall'Australia.
Hallo, ik ben Albert Schont uit Nederland.
Hi, I'm Maarten Goed from the Netherlands.
Hi, kamusta? I'm Ruby Jane Cabagna from the Philippines.
Hola, hello. Hey there.
Hola, soy Sebastián Pérez de Argentina.
您好，
Desde
我是
España.
胡浩，来自中国上海。
Hi, I'm Sarah Lane from Scotland.
Bonjour, I'm Charlene from France.
Hello, I'm Ruth from France.
שלום, אני ערן סטילר מישראל.
from the Netherlands.
Bonjour, I'm Olivier from
Hi, I'm Gilbert Villiers of Gold Coast, Australia.
For everyone who is upskilling this staycation, we have something very special. The Summer Learner Badger, and you can earn one for joining this event. Scan the QR code, which will appear on your screen, and claim your badger. Azure Heroes is a Microsoft program for recognizing community efforts.